As you know, we're going through a series through the Bible. We've been several years on the Old Testament survey. We're going to be we're going through the Gospels now, the life of Christ. We're taking just a few weeks break just because I don't know, if you read your newspaper and you read the Bible, things are getting bad. And so last week we talked about probably the second most likely group to be slaughtered in the world, and that's Bible-believing Christians. About 160,000 Christians are losing their lives throughout the world. That's why Voice of the Martyrs is such an honorable ministry to get the word out, what's going on. And our media is playing a role in that, just by not reporting Christians that are being killed. Okay? So there's a Holocaust, an anti-Christian agenda that is going on, and our media is choosing not to even report about it. Okay? If one politically correct person gets beat up by somebody who's, I guess, not politically correct, they put that on the news all the time to make it look like this is what's happening all over the place. But Christians being slaughtered. In fact, now we have a president that wants to back and support militarily the so-called freedom fighters in Syria. And we have Syrian people testifying in America saying most of them aren't even Syrians. They're coming from other countries. They're Al-Qaeda members. And they're killing Christians more than the Assad regime is, and now our president wants to take sides, and so all of a sudden the war on terrorism is going to be fought side by side with Al-Qaeda? What's wrong with that picture? So the persecution of Christians is a horrible thing. However, if I were to say that the persecution of Christians today is the largest Holocaust that we have in the world, I would be lying to you. There is a group of human beings, and I emphasize they are human beings. There is a group of human beings that are more likely to be put to death in the United States of America and other countries throughout the world. A group of human beings that are being slaughtered at a higher rate than Bible-believing Christians. And of course, you know what I'm talking about. That's unborn babies. And I titled the message, Abortion, the American Holocaust. Every few years we preach on this just to remind our people, if God's people don't stand up to defend unborn babies, we're going to expect the atheists to do it? And so we've got to be all that God called us to be, and that means we're going to have to stand up. And we're going to get that opportunity. The life chain is going to be, I think, October 5th to 6th or 7th, somewhere in there. It's going to be right after church, and we'll get that opportunity to get out there and peacefully hold signs. And probably 9 out of 10 people will give us a thumbs up and beep when they drive by. And other people will use a different finger to express their disapproval, and they'll, freak out and stuff, and it's just well, they have issues. But it gives us a chance to speak out. The Christian worldview, the way the Christian views reality through the lenses of God's Word, is that all human life, no matter what stage, all human life is sacred. Man was created in God's image. We'll talk about that. Now, the atheistic worldview says that man is mere molecules in motion. And this is why Charles Darwin, when he wrote his Origin of Species in 1859, and he proposed the evolutionary model, a lot of people remember that, and they don't remember what he wrote, I believe, in 1871, The Descent of Man. The Descent of Man, what he talked about, well, if it's survival of the fittest, eventually it's going to happen where the more advanced races of humans, which is baloney, by the way. The Bible teaches there's only one human race. Evolution teaches there's lots of different races of humans. But he argued that if evolution is true, the superior races are going to start slaughtering the inferior races. And he admitted it bothered him because he had a Christian upbringing in Great Britain. But this started the eugenics movement. In fact, Darwin got upset that his cousin, Francis Galton, actually published a work on it before he got a chance to. And so Galton gets a lot of the credit for the eugenics movement. Eugenics means good genes. It means it's a movement to weed out the undesirables, okay, the undesirable humans, and to try to advance mankind in his forward-moving evolution. You see, the creation worldview, the Christian worldview says all men are created equal. I've never heard an atheist argue that all men have evolved equally. So the only reason why atheists fight for equal rights, even though they usually do it in a warped way, but when they're fighting for equal rights, it's because they can't help it. They're still borrowing capital from the Christian worldview. Human equality is a biblical Christian idea, a Judeo-Christian idea. It is not an atheistic idea. If atheists were consistent, it would be the survival of the fittest. The New Age worldview believes that man is God. God is a big impersonal, non-personal force. Man is God. Yet, and you would think, well, that's a higher view than man just being in the image of God. They think man is God. Well, it sounds real good, but in reality, they think of mankind as being God collectively. Okay? So, if you have a tree and a branch dies, to enhance the growth of the rest of the tree, you cut off that branch. Okay? So, New Agers like Barbara Marx Hubbard talks about how we have to exterminate 1 out of every 4 people on the planet Earth if we're going to enter into the New Age. You look at the United Nations and their population control statistics, and somehow, some way, by the year, 2040, they want to cut the world's population in half. So the New Age worldview leads to the idea of extermination of less spiritually evolved humans to encourage the evolution of the whole race to move forward. So what we want to do, we want to look at this and take a biblical look. Now, the leading proponent of abortion in America is Planned Parenthood, and Margaret Sanger was the founder of Planned Parenthood, a godless lady. Anytime you watch what the media says about her, they almost, it's like, are you talking about Mother Teresa, or are you talking about Margaret Sanger? They try to make her look like she was such a nice lady and things of that sort. So I want to read a little bit from George Grant's work, Killer Angel, which is the true story about Margaret Sanger. Now, he talks first about Thomas Malthus and his views on population control. But Grant says this on page 51. Malthus' disciples, the Malthusians and Neo-Malthusians, believe that if Western civilization were to survive, the physically unfit, the materially poor, the spiritually diseased, the racially inferior, and the mentally incompetent had to somehow be suppressed and isolated, or perhaps even eliminated. And while Malthus was forthright in recommending plague, pestilence, and putrefaction, his disciples felt the subtler and more scientific approaches of education, contraception, sterilization, and abortion were more practical and acceptable ways to ease the pressures of the supposed overpopulation. And Margaret Sanger, she became a Malthusian. She accepted that type of thinking. And so she readily embraced the whole eugenics movement. Page 103 and 104 of George Grant's work, Killer Angel, he states that in her book, Woman and the New Race, Margaret Sanger asserted that the most merciful thing a large family can do to one of its infant members is to kill it. This is what Planned Parenthood is all about. Okay? In her first newspaper, The Woman Rebel, Margaret Sanger admitted that birth control appeals to the advanced radical because it is calculated to undermine the authority of the Christian churches. I look forward to seeing humanity free someday of the tyranny of Christianity, no less than capitalism. And then Grant says, today Planned Parenthood is continuing her crusade against the church. So she was socialistic in her thinking, wanted the government to control everything, get away from capitalism. In fact, they were even, many of her colleagues were actually acknowledged themselves to be communist and all, but many of the communists wanted nothing to do with them because it was really, they wanted to be terribly rich, and they had access to lots and lots of money, but they wanted everybody else to be poor, and they wanted to redistribute everybody else's wealth, and then a big portion was going to come back to them. So what I want to do is look at the biblical view of the sanctity of human life, okay, and then see where America is right now. And so, again, at this point, probably over 155 million babies have been aborted in this country alone. You know, and it's one of those deals. We want to stick our nose in everybody else's business and go to war with everybody and their mother's brother because, you know, Saddam Hussein's an evil man. Well, yes, he's an evil man. And now the head of Syria, he's an evil man too. Yeah, there's almost, you know, there's a bunch of thugs over there in the Middle East. But we always act like we have the moral high ground. America is so pure and so righteous, and our government is so, you know, I mean, our leaders just want what's best for us. They just love us. They just want to take care of us. And that's the idea that they want us to believe, the lie they want us to believe, and therefore we have the moral high ground. Well, let me tell you, on abortion alone, just on the 55 million innocent unborn babies that we have slaughtered in this country means America no longer has the moral high ground. And we might turn our religion, our Christianity into some kind of ultra patriotism and say, no, we're the greatest nation on earth and we're better than everybody and all this other stuff. And if we're better than other countries, we've got the right to go there and topple their dictators. John Quincy Adams, when he was president, he said America does not seek monsters abroad to topple lest we lose freedom within our borders. What he's saying is we're not going to waste our time bumping off dictators because then another dictator is just gonna fill in. We got to worry about preserving freedom here in America. But if you think we've got the moral high ground, what if a country like Russia or what if a country like China decided that they were going to go against abortion? Right now they have the one-child per family policy, and it's forced abortion. It's even worse than what we're doing over here. But let's just say, hypothetically, that China gave up on abortion and then said, look at America, it's killing all those unborn babies. We've got to stop the killing. And then the Chinese troops invaded America. Would we applaud them as they came? No, we wouldn't applaud them. We would say, well, you're right and we're wrong, but it's none of your business. This is our problem. We got to solve it. But we're always looking to big government solutions, but we have lost the moral high ground. Okay? Jesus told us that if you want to help somebody get the splinter out of their eye, you got to first take the log out of your own eye. So if you want to avoid judgment, stop passing judgment. We are not in a position to be. In fact, we can't even afford it anymore. But we are not in the position to be the policemen of the earth. And God didn't institute human government for there to be a global police force. God does not want a global government until the Lord Jesus returns, and then we'll have the all-powerful, all-knowing, all-righteous King of Kings and Lord of Lords. Until that point, the worst possible government you could have is global government. And so let's take a look at what the Bible teaches about abortion. And so what we have to do is look at how the Bible views human life. And look at Genesis 1, verse 27. In fact, verses 26 and 27. Then God said, "Let us make man in our image, according to our likeness. Let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, and over the cattle, and all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth." So God created man in His own image. In the image of God, He created him. Male and female, He created them. Now that just sounds real special, just the way it is. But read the whole chapter about God creating. Mankind is the only thing He says, that He created mankind in His image. Okay? That's why today, because this is rejected, we see like the animal rights movement where animals are given rights, and that's increasing more and more. So after a while, I mean, an unborn bald eagle has way more rights than an unborn human being in this country. Okay? See, Friedrich Nietzsche said, God is dead. Friedrich Nietzsche, the German atheist who died in 1900, what he was saying was Christianity has died. It is no longer the dominant worldview of Western civilization's leading thinkers. But he said if God is dead, then truth is dead and morality is dead as well. What he failed to realize, though, if God is dead, man is dead too. There's no way to consistently argue for the sacredness of human life and for the worth of human life, the value of human life, if we have thrown God off the bridge. If we have gotten rid of God, then there is no value to human life, and might is right. And so the Bible teaches human life is sacred because God created man in His image. Now, we don't have time to read it, but in Genesis 3, though man was created in God's image, man is now fallen. Adam and Eve fell into sin. We inherit a sin nature. So we have distorted or perverted or corrupted the image of God in man. So we do not perfectly reflect God's image anymore. So somebody might say, okay, well then now that we don't no longer perfectly reflect the image of God, then human life is no longer sacred, and we could just start killing each other off left and right. But that's not what the Bible teaches. After God, one of the reasons why God was mad at the pre-flood human race was because of their violence. And they were slaughtering one another left and right, and they weren't worshiping Him. So He floods the earth. Noah and his 3 sons and their wives are the only ones left to repopulate the earth with the animals that they brought on the ark. And then in Genesis 9, God gives mankind permission to eat animals. So I take that to mean that before the flood, they were just eating plant life. I guess now with the change in the Earth's atmosphere and, now, 2/3 to 3/4 of the surface of the Earth is water, that there isn't the abundance of plant life. It's probably not as wholesome as it used to be. And God says you can start eating animals now. Certain animals you can eat, certain animals you can't. But then just in case Noah had some kind of evolutionary leanings and might think that man is just an animal, just in case, God says this, after giving Noah permission to eat animals, Genesis 9, verse 6, whoever sheds man's blood, by man his blood shall be shed, for in the image of God He made man. And so He's basically saying, look, you can kill animals and eat them, but don't kill other human beings. Don't kill innocent human beings because they were created in God's image. So even though we no longer fully and completely and perfectly reflect the image of God, we reflect it enough to where God says human life is still sacred. Plus, we find out that Jesus, who is the perfect image of the invisible God, because He is God the Son become a man, Colossians 1:15, He is the perfect image of God, and He has come to earth. Then we find out in Romans 8:29 and 30 that Jesus is fully going to conform us into His image, so that we will once again, someday, redeemed human beings, those who are saved by Jesus, will someday be fully conformed to God's image once again, the image of God. I mean, you could title the Bible The Image of God. And chapter 1, man created in God's image. Genesis chapter 3, the image of God is marred. The Gospels, the perfect image of God comes to earth to redeem mankind. And then going on to the book of Revelation, the Lord is going to return, and the day will come when we will reflect the image of God to the degree that God intended us to. But whatever the case, man was created in God's image. Man is now fallen, but still human life is sacred even after the fall. Now, look at Proverbs 6. It amazes me. It amazes me that I have to preach in America in the 21st century. It utterly amazes me that I have to tell people and preach and point to verses that teach that it is wrong, it is a sin to kill innocent human beings. It is a sin to take innocent human life. It amazes me that I even have to I mean, to me, that's self-evident. Self-evidently true, yet it's not that way anymore. We actually have scholars, and I'm going to quote from Peter Singer today, a Princeton bioethicist who's considered one of the world's leading experts on what is right and what is wrong, and he teaches that it's okay to kill certain human beings, innocent human beings who have committed no crimes, just because of their disabilities or they're not born yet or whatever it may be. So look at Proverbs 6:16 and 17. These 6 things the Lord hates, yet 7 are an abomination to Him: a proud look, a lying tongue, hands that shed innocent blood, a heart that devises wicked plans, feet that are swift in running to evil, a false witness who speaks lies, and one who sows discord among brethren. Look at that. One of the 7 things that are an abomination to God is hands that shed innocent blood. Okay? Yet, we think, oh, we're so great. We're the greatest nation on earth. Other nations need to be. If another nation is not like us, that's horrible. Yeah, well, I agree. All these other governments on earth are horrible. It's just if I understand my Bible, our government's horrible too. So let's work on taking the log out of our own eye. Let's stop wiping out a future generation of Americans just for to bow before the altar of a God called convenience. And so it is wrong to shed innocent blood. Psalm 106, 37 and 38. Psalm 106, 37 and 38. It talks about when the Jews became disobedient to God. It says they served their idols, which became a snare to them. That's 36. 37, they even sacrificed their sons and their daughters to demons and shed innocent blood, the blood of their sons and daughters, whom they sacrificed to the idols of Canaan, the false gods of Canaan, and the land was polluted with blood. And we think, well, we're not that bad. We don't sacrifice our kids. We don't sacrifice our offspring on the altar to some false Canaanite god. No, we sacrifice our kids at the altar of a God called convenience. Okay? America's got judgment coming. And the crazy thing is, most of it's self-inflicted. We even elect our judgment, you know. And but whatever the case, the Bible is clear. It is wrong to take innocent human life. I'm going to preach something that's pretty much, for all practical purposes, evil and illegal I should say illegal in the public schools. I'm going to quote from one of the Ten Commandments here. And that's not supposed to go on in the public schools, I guess, Monday through Friday. So praise God, this is Sunday. Maybe I'll get away with it, maybe I won't someday. Exodus chapter 20 and verse 13. Oh, I was looking, I was saying, what? The Ten Commandments aren't there? I was in Genesis. Okay. Exodus 20 and verse 13. You shall not murder. Okay? Some translate it, thou shalt not kill. Others say, no, this is unauthorized killing, because it's okay to kill a convicted murderer or to kill in war if it's a just war. And so that's probably the best translation. You shall not murder. You shall not kill an innocent human being. So, I mean, that should be a no-brainer. You know, but you post that on the wall here. There are a lot of things posted on the wall here. This is a government-run school. You post that on the wall, and I guess that's offensive. And so then you could put posters about Gay Pride Week or whatever, or Gay Pride parades, or Planned Parenthood, as they're invited. They've got a place here. Okay? But you put the Ten Commandments up, and you're going to get in a lot of trouble in this country. That's the only two things, well, the only three things that our government really can't stand: God, His truth, and His morality. Other than that, they're okay. But so whatever the case, the Bible teaches that man was created in God's image, and though fallen, human life is still sacred even after the fall. It is wrong to take innocent human life. And then we see in Job 1:21 that God alone is sovereign over life. Job 1:21. Job is suffering. And, you know, here this guy is suffering, everything's coming down. And look at verse 20. Look how he responds. Then Job arose, tore his robe, shaved his head, and he fell to the ground and worshipped. A lot of people like to slam Job because he did a lot of complaining in the book of Job. Believe me, he didn't do anywhere near the complaining we would have done. If God put me through this situation, the book of Phil would be like 5 times bigger than the rest of the Bible. I would have complained so much. God didn't put me through something like that because who knows, but I would have probably failed the test. But here, Job, everything's coming apart in his life, and what does he do? He worships God. You know, human nature says, wow, that doesn't make any sense. But if you respect God's word, it makes all the sense in the world. When things go bad and it's out of your control, where else are you going to go but to the God who made the heavens and the earth? And it says, and he said, naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked shall I return there. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. And all this, Job did not sin or charge God with wrong. So there he says that the Lord is the one who has given, and the Lord is the one who can take away. Well, who's the one who has given life? It is the Lord. He's the one who's given human life. We have no right to take human life unless He has told us to. There were times in the Old Testament where God commanded the Jews to slaughter the pagans. That was a specific command for a specific people, God's chosen people. But that command came from God. He is sovereign over life. He's the giver of life. He has the authority to take life. Okay? God used that authority to take life when He flooded the earth. Okay? And I'll be honest with you, we couldn't even execute, we don't even have the right to execute murderers unless God instituted human government, which He did in Genesis 9:6. Romans 13:1-7 talks about that as well. See, it's God's authority. Romans 12 Paul says that God tells us, vengeance is mine, says the Lord. So we're supposed to turn the other cheek, not take our own revenge. But then it goes right into Romans 13 that God instituted human government to bring God's vengeance down on the evildoer. Okay? So only God, as the giver of life, has the right to take life, but He's delegated some of that authority to us in certain situations. Okay? But the rule is, thou shalt not take innocent human life. Only God is sovereign over life. So then the question comes up, okay, well, when does life begin? Maybe life begins when the baby comes out and breathes his first breath, then it's a human being, but maybe you can kill it before that point because it's not a human being. So when does human life begin? Well, I'll tell you when the Bible says that it begins. Look at Psalm 51:5. The Psalm of King David. This is when he was confronted by Nathan the prophet for his sins of adultery and murder, and he repented. And he says this about himself, Psalm 51, verse 5, Behold, I was brought forth in iniquity, and in sin my mother conceived me. He wasn't saying that his mother was sinning when he was conceived. He was saying, like the NIV says, I was sinful from the moment I was conceived. Let me tell you something. Tissue is not sinful. My pinky is not sinful. I, a human being, am sinful. If David was sinful from the moment he was conceived, and we inherit our sin nature the same way he did, so we were sinful from the moment we were conceived, okay, then basically we're not tissue. We're a human being from the moment we were conceived. Only humans are sinful. By the way, only humans and fallen angels are sinful. Even animals aren't sinful. An animal could be a disobedient dog, but the dog really doesn't know right from wrong. And if you don't know, if you're a non-moral species, you really don't have rights, because rights entail responsibility. So the whole animal rights movement is just off base from the start. The only reason why we treat animals with some form of dignity is because they're gifts to us from God. And so if I gave you a gift and you took it and said, oh, thanks for the gift, and you dropped it on the ground and stomped on it, I would be offended. God has given us gifts of animals, so we should be faithful stewards over what God has given us. Okay? But the idea that animals have rights, that's just not biblical, and it's not philosophically sound either. But the Bible teaches that human life begins at conception. I'm going to argue today that that is also a medical fact, that human life begins at the moment of conception, and that the whole Supreme Court arguing that we don't know when human life begins is baloney. Okay, the late Dr. Jerome Lejeune, he testified in a court of law. He was from France. He speaks French. English is another language that he learned, so his English was a little broken, though better than most Americans born here. But Dr. Jerome Lejeune, let me read a little bit about him. This is from R.C. Sproul's book, Abortion, A Rational Look at an Emotional Issue, R.C. Sproul. And he's got an Appendix A, starting on page 159, the testimony on the beginning of human life. It says, the following transcript is a portion of the court proceedings. It was in Tennessee, August 10th, 1989, in which Jerome Lejeune, M.D., Ph.D., testified. Dr. Lejeune is professor of fundamental genetics on the Faculty of Medicine of Paris, holds the Kennedy Prize for being the first to discover a disease caused by chromosomal abnormality, Down syndrome, and is a member of a number of prestigious medical and scientific organizations. Basically what they're saying is that Dr. Jerome Lejeune was one of the world's leading geneticists. Okay? And it says this, he's being questioned. This case, by the way, they had thousands of, husband and wife were getting a divorce, and they had thousands of embryos, human embryos made, and then frozen, and, you know, I don't know if they actually got to the point of bringing one of them to term and had a baby and all, but there was a custody dispute about these. And you have to pay for storage for all these frozen embryos. Okay? Frozen human embryos, you have to pay storage. And one of the two, the husband or the wife, one of the two wanted them to be exterminated, to be killed, so they didn't have to pay it. The other one was saying, no, they're human beings. We can't kill them. Okay? And so he was asked to testify, and he says this, and if I could say so, I would say that life has a very long history, but each of us has a unique beginning, the moment of conception. As soon as the 23 chromosomes carried by the sperm encounter the 23 chromosomes carried by the ovum, the whole information necessary and sufficient to spell out all the characteristics of the new being is gathered. When this information carried by the sperm and by the ovum has encountered each other, then a new human being is defined because its own personal and human constitution is entirely spelled out. A little further in the same testimony, Lejeune states, a new life will begin when a female and a male cell will encounter to produce the next generation. And I would say that science has a very simple conception of man. As soon as he has been conceived, a man is a man. And then they kind of really got in his face, the lawyer did. And the lawyer said this, will you concede, Dr. Lejeune, there are other very distinguished scientists, men who are as learned as you, who have thought and who have access to the same scientific information that you have, who come to a different conclusion? Lejeune says, about what? The lawyer says, about the moral rights or moral duties to the zygote, the fertilized egg. Oh, in that case, yes, says Lejeune, but not about the fact that it's a human being or not. And then the lawyer said, I understand that. And then Lejeune says, but that's the point. Okay? So what's going on here, and you don't have to read between the lines, you just got to read the lines. Lejeune is saying, look, it's just a fact. Human life starts at the moment of conception. There's no debate about that among the world's leading geneticists. Human life starts at the moment of conception. What is being debated is whether this human has the same right to life as that human. Okay? So when Planned Parenthood says the unborn baby is just tissue, that Planned Parenthood spokesperson is either lying or is just ignorant of what the leaders of the pro-abortion movement have been teaching all along since the 1970s. In fact, when Watson and Crick won the Nobel Prize for cracking the genetic code, when they gave their acceptance speeches, they said, look, we think it's great that countries around the world are starting to legalize abortion and killing babies before they're born, but since we've played God and we've arbitrarily declared that an unborn baby is not a human and a born baby is a human, that is such an arbitrary choice, why not just extend it 3 more days? Say Watson and Crick. In other words, they're saying, look, I don't believe God exists, so man's allowed to play God. If we're going to arbitrarily say an unborn baby is not a human, which we know that's false, But if we're going to say that, why not just extend it 3 more days? Then the doctors and the family can look at the baby and decide, do we want to take care of this baby? Do we want to bring this baby further on? So we can just so what they're saying is we're just arbitrarily defining when human life begins when we know that it actually begins at the moment of conception. And that's Watson and Crick. Again, 2 of the world's leading genetic experts. And then what Francis Schaeffer, the late Christian thinker Francis Schaeffer, argued in the late 60s and the early 70s that if we legalize abortion, which we did in America in 1973, if we legalize abortion, since we're legalizing killing human beings at one stage, we're going to start killing human beings at other stages. He said if we legalize abortion, infanticide will follow, murder of babies already born, and then euthanasia, so-called mercy killing, will follow. And that's been true since the 1990s. Without any change in laws, judges throughout this country have been giving people permission to euthanize their loved ones. And Terry Schiavo was when the culture of death, the pro-death camp decided to go that to make her their poster child. And a lady who wasn't dying, had some severe brain damage, but could still laugh at jokes and recognize her parents. She was sentenced to death in this country in Florida, and it took her about 17 days to slowly starve to death. Okay? And so what Francis Schaeffer said is correct, but you don't have to take my word for it. I'm going to read from Peter Singer. Before I do, though, let me just drill home a little bit more the fact that human life starts at the moment of conception. Norman Geisler, his work, Christian Ethics, Options, and Issues, one of my former professors, he says on page 149 of that work, at a U.S. congressional hearing in 1981, so the year I got saved, 1981, scientific experts from around the world testified about the beginning of an individual life. So this is in the congressional record. There are congressional hearings on this just 8 years after Roe versus Wade when we legalized abortion. And here's what Dr. Michelin M. Matthews-Roth stated. In biology and in medicine, it is an accepted fact that the life of any individual organism reproducing by sexual reproduction begins at conception or fertilization. He's basically saying it's a fact of biology and medicine that life starts at conception. Jerome Lejeune also testified there. He said to accept the fact that after fertilization has taken place, a new human has come into being is no longer a matter of taste or opinion. The human nature of the human being from conception to old age is not a metaphysical contention. It's not a philosophical idea. It is plain experimental evidence. Again, human life starts at the moment of conception. See, what I'm saying is our leaders know the truth. They know the facts, and they still promote this. And then Dr. Jaime Gordon also testified there at the congressional hearings. But now we can say unequivocally that the question of when life begins is no longer a question for theological or philosophical dispute. It is an established scientific fact. Theologians and philosophers may go on to debate the meaning of life or the purpose of life, but it is an established fact that all life, including human life, begins at the moment of conception. Okay? So basically what I'm arguing is that if an intelligent pro-abortionist is honest about their views, then they would have to admit that they are for killing certain human beings. Okay? And so we turn to Peter Singer over there in Princeton, New Jersey, considered one of the world's leading experts on what is right and what is wrong. What does Peter Singer say? Well, in his Practical Ethics, it's the second edition on page 169, Singer says this: I have argued that the life of a fetus, and even more plainly of an embryo, is of no greater value than the life of a non-human animal at a similar level of rationality, self-consciousness, awareness, capacity to feel, etc., and that since no fetus is a person, no fetus has the same claim to life as a person. See, what he's doing here is he's saying not all human beings have personhood. Not all human beings are persons. You have to have a certain level of consciousness before I'll declare you a person. Okay? And so again, we're playing God. He acknowledges that Christians are right. Human life starts at the moment of conception. Therefore, Peter Singer argues why it's okay to kill some humans and not other humans. Now, it must be admitted that these arguments apply to the newborn baby as much as to the fetus. So what he's saying is the intellectual elite's arguments for abortion apply just as well to infants already born and really to other handicapped people as well. Francis Schaeffer was right. Abortion would lead to infanticide and to euthanasia. A week-old baby, says Singer, is not a rational and self-conscious being. There are many non-human animals whose rationality, self-consciousness, awareness, capacity to feel, and so on exceed that of a human baby a week or a month old. If the fetus does not have the same claim to life as a person, it appears that the newborn baby does not either. And the life of a newborn baby is of less value to it than the life of a pig, a dog, or a chimpanzee is to the non-human animal. So what he's basically saying is, because a full-grown pig or chimpanzee or dog has a higher level of awareness, that animal values its life more than a little baby does. And so since the baby doesn't value its life that much, hasn't achieved the level of consciousness or what Singer calls personhood, then since the baby doesn't value its life that much at that point, we don't have to value it either. And so really, it's shorthand for saying the value, the life of a full-grown pig or chimpanzee is worth more, has more value than the life of a newborn baby. This is where we've gone through evolutionary thought. Page 172 of Practical Ethics. He says this: in the next chapter, however, we shall consider another possibility, that there should be at least some circumstances in which a full legal right to life comes into force not at birth, but only a short time after birth, perhaps a month. So now all of a sudden the 3 days has been stretched out to a month. Last I heard, I think Singer moved it up to 3 months. That if you don't want a baby, you could just exterminate it within the first 3 months. This would provide the ample safety margin mentioned above. If these conclusions seem too shocking to take seriously, it may be worth remembering that our present absolute protection of the lives of infants is a distinctively Christian attitude rather than a universal ethical value. What he's saying is, I don't believe in moral absolutes. I don't believe in God. So if we're not Christians, there's no basis for arguing that human life, by definition, is automatically sacred. And he says on page 342 of Practical Ethics, my intention in these lectures, they were transcribed into book form, my intention in these lectures was to defend a view for which I have argued in several previously published works, that the parents of severely disabled newborn infants should be able to decide, together with their physician, whether their infant should live or die. If the parents and their medical advisor are in agreement that the infant's life will be so miserable or so devoid of minimal satisfactions that it would be inhumane or futile to prolong life, then they should be allowed to ensure that death comes about speedily and without suffering. And so there you have it. Peter Singer promoting that. Now, by the way, when I read quotes, I teach ethics, an ethics elective every other year at Cross Point Academy to 11th and 12th graders. And when I read excerpts from Peter Singer, I'll read excerpts where every other page, I'm exaggerating there, it's not every other page, but at least 15 times throughout his book, he stops and explains. Now, keep in mind, my views are different than what Hitler and the Nazis said. And then he splits hairs to show the differences. So I ask my students, what would you think if every 2 or 3 days when I was lecturing you, I had to stop and say, now keep in mind, what I'm saying is different from the Nazis. And I had to split some hairs. Well, they figured out. They said, well, that would tell us your views are pretty close to the Nazis. And so I say, bingo, that's why I think he was just recently allowed to speak in Germany. Normally when he goes to Germany to speak, there's all these protests because it sounds too much like what the Nazis taught. And he was banned from speaking in Germany. When he gets protested at Princeton, half the people in the protest are in wheelchairs. Because they know exactly what this guy is talking about. You see, if God is dead, man is dead too. If you want to throw God off the bridge, there are several consequences that come with that. You throw God off the bridge, truth goes out the window as well, morality goes out the window, meaning goes out the window, and man goes out the window as well. If there is no God, human life is not sacred. When the ancient Greek philosophers skeptics were trying to argue there's no such thing as right and wrong, then a Greek philosopher named Thrasymachus arose on the scene and said, well, if there's no such thing as right and wrong, then might is right. But he said, whoever has the most power is going to invent what they want to be right and wrong, and they're going to force that down everybody else's throat. Now, Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle refuted that and believed in absolute moral laws. Then when the skeptics came on the scene again a few hundred years later, St. Augustine and the Christian thinkers refuted that, and we got back to absolute morality. But now, since we have a new Thrasymachus, his name is Friedrich Nietzsche. He died in 1900. He said there's no longer right and wrong. God doesn't exist. All that's left is man's will to power. And unfortunately, the prophetic messages of C.S. Lewis and Francis Schaeffer have been ignored. Ravi Zacharias, his message is being ignored right now as we speak. And so I think that Thrasymachus' might is right, and Friedrich Nietzsche's will to power is going to win the day. And you know what might is right translates into? It's what I call the deification of the state, where the state takes care of every aspect of your life, so you have to almost worship and fully depend on the government, and then the government controls you. It's what C.S. Lewis called the abolition of man, where he said the few will control the billions. It's what Francis Schaeffer called the death of man. And we're seeing this come about. If God is dead, man is dead as well. So human life begins at conception, whether you look at the Bible or you turn to the world's leading genetic experts. So in other words, the world's leading thinkers who are pro-abortion know that human life starts at conception, but they are pro-killing human beings. Okay? And so now we see this move on from killing you. Now these doctors, these last two doctors that they found, one was already charged and convicted, that if babies survived the abortions, they would still kill them right there on the table. And this is occurring throughout this country, as well as many disabled people are being euthanized. Now, let me show you just a couple other passages, and then we'll receive the Lord's Supper. Exodus 21. In the law of Moses, it was that you're actually given the death penalty for killing an unborn baby. So the human being, an unborn baby was considered a human being with the same rights as an adult human. Now, some translations don't translate this well. And I'll talk about that just briefly. But Exodus 21, 22 to 25, if men fight and hurt a woman with child, right there it tells you that the unborn baby is a child. If men fight and hurt a woman with child so that she gives birth prematurely, some translations read so that she has a miscarriage. That's not in the original. Is so that the fruit departs. Okay, but the fruit departs. The fruit of the womb departs when a baby is born. That doesn't tell you if the baby's alive or not. Okay, but it's definitely not. Should not be translated as a miscarriage. Men fight and hurt a woman with child so that she gives birth prematurely, yet no harm follows. He shall surely be punished accordingly as the woman's husband imposes on him, and he shall pay as the judge determines. But if any harm follows, then you shall give life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burn for burn, wound for wound, stripe for stripe. See, if you try to make the one that's hurt or injured the woman, that's already been dealt with. You kill another human being, you're deserving of death. Why bring in a pregnant lady unless we're talking about the status of the baby? So whatever the case, the scriptures say there should be a death penalty for killing an unborn baby, just as it would be the death penalty for killing a human being already born. We don't have time to look at it, but in Luke chapter 1, verses 41 and 44, you have the baby in the womb is called brephos. But in chapter 2, verse 12 of Luke, the baby after it's born is still called brephos. We translated child. That's why when a lady is pregnant, we say, like the Bible says, it's a woman with child. She is with child. She's not with tissue. Okay? She is with child. And so the Bible is really clear. The unborn baby is a human being, and that they have the same rights that other humans have. Now let's close with James 1:27. James 1:27. And then as a community of believers, those who have been adopted into the family of God, we're going to celebrate our Savior and celebrate our unity as believers and celebrate Jesus' death and resurrection for us by partaking of the Lord's Supper. But James 1:27, James says this: pure and undefiled religion before God and the Father is this, to visit orphans and widows in their trouble and to keep oneself unspotted from the world. See, a lot of people say, well, Christianity is not a religion, it's a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. Well, that's true. Christianity does not claim that religion saves you. Christianity claims that Jesus saves you. But religion is still man's response to God. All the other world's religions say man saves himself by properly responding to God. That's false. Okay? Only Jesus can save us. But once you are saved, there is a proper response of gratitude to God. And James summarized that pure and undefiled response to God, that pure and undefiled religion, as visiting orphans and widows in their trouble and keeping oneself unspotted from the world. So we don't sin with the world. You might tell me, Pastor Phil, I'm not sinning out there with the world. Yeah, but that's only half of the game. Are you standing up for those who can't help themselves? Are you helping the helpless, the orphans? The first Operation Rescue, the early church, they went around, the Roman Empire said, they made it against the law to kill your unborn baby and just throw it out the window on the street. It was legal. You could take your baby and expose it to the elements by taking it to the local junkyard and disposing of it, and then wild beasts or the weather would kill your baby. Still, people, if they threw their baby out the window and was right in the street and you're stepping over dead babies, the Roman Empire really rarely did they enforce that. So that was common too. So the early church, and you could read this from the early church fathers, they would walk the streets and look for little babies who were still alive, and if they didn't find any in the streets, they go to the junkyard and tried to rescue them. I believe it was Tertullian that they say was one of the great church fathers. Tertullian was one of the little babies that was rescued from the junkyard. Let me tell you, God loved mankind so much that He died on the cross for us. for each and every one of us. Every single human being is precious in God's sight. If the church isn't going to stand up for the orphans and the widows and the unborn babies, I don't know who is going to fill in the gap. So in conclusion, the actions to take, we need to peacefully protest and educate other Americans. You know, some people think, well, if you're really pro-life, you've got to go out there and kill people to prove it. Well, no, that's not the case. We need to peacefully protest and to educate other Americans. I think the Life Chain, the Walk for Life are real good ways to do that. Talking to others. The most powerful thing you can do, lead people to Christ, get them in a good Bible-believing church where they can be discipled and grow and start accepting not only God's view of himself, but also God's view of mankind. We also need to forgive and counsel ladies who've had abortions. That's one thing that really ticks me off. Last time I studied the issue, it seems to me that if you're going to make a baby, it takes a guy and a gal. So a guy and a gal go to bed together, but then the gal goes alone to the abortion clinic. And believe me, we used to peacefully protest by the Planned Parenthood agency when it was down on Sheridan, I believe it was, and never saw a guy walking in the door. A lot of teenage gals. Never saw a guy. The guy did his thing, you know. But by the way, Women's Live movement today, Women's Live movement argues the greatest thing you could do to empower a woman is to abort your baby without the consent of the father. That is a big lie. Because there are a bunch of Romeos out there that are laughing and abusing ladies and they think they can make babies all over the country, and then if the lady doesn't want to raise the baby, the lady can kill her baby. And now we have, we do ultrasound, we find out if it's a boy or a girl. And guess what? There's some couples that want to abort their babies if it's a girl. Okay? This is not, last I heard, this isn't a big woman's right, big step forward for woman's right if more ladies are being aborted than men. But even if the numbers were equal, how could that be a big step forward for women's rights when you're killing women at the earliest stages of life? And so we need to peacefully protest, educate other Americans, lead them to Christ, disciple them, forgive and counsel ladies who had abortions, choose adoption. Liberty University, Jerry Falwell, when he was alive, started the Godparents Home. He just bought this great big house, and they took in any teenage girls that were pregnant, that were thinking of having an abortion. They'd offer them a home, they'd buy them clothes, they'd take care of them, and they'd work with them so that if the girl didn't want to, they'd try to convince them not to have an abortion. And if the girl chose not to have an abortion and didn't want to raise the baby, they would find parents within Jerry Falwell's large church to adopt the baby. They ordained a guy as a minister there, a retired elderly gentleman. He used to teach the ladies Bible studies. My wife and I got to visit there the first time I went to Liberty University in 1987. But choose adoption. They talk about unwanted babies. It used to be... we used to abort I don't know what the numbers are exactly now, but we used to abort 1.5 million babies every year in America. And there was something like 1.7 or 1.8 families that got turned down for adoption in that same year. No babies unwanted. And then we need to pray. And, of course, we need to evangelize and disciple. We cannot expect Americans to think and act like Christians if they're not Christians. Okay? So don't freak out when we get more and more pagan, anti-God laws. We haven't been doing our job. You want to change the culture, the evangelical church thought, we got to change our culture. Let's change the leaders and change the laws. That does hardly anything. You want to change the culture, you got to change hearts. Most powerful thing you can do is lead your neighbor to Christ and get them in a solid Bible-believing, Bible-preaching church where they'll be discipled. And you start changing hearts, you can begin to change a culture.